Well, I'm Gregg Young, and I'm going to do a presentation on the Qt Creator Development Environment. To tell you the truth, the first time I ever used the Qt Developer Environment was to do this. So Qt, just basically what it is, it's a collection of widgets which are basically just the things you see on the screen. It's the user interface, it's the window, it's the menus. All of this can be done very, very simplistically. It doesn't write any of the code that actually does something. In other words, it makes the pretty picture that you're going to look at. The way to install the Qt developer package is with RPM Yum. It's really the easiest way. The first thing you're going to need to do is do what Neil did earlier and install GCC and the rest of the developer tools for GCC. Like I said, AMPM is the easiest way to do it because the bootstrap in it puts in a whole bunch of the dependencies that all these things depend on. I'm doing this in Qt4. The reason I'm doing it in Qt4 instead of Qt5 is that to build Qt Creator in Qt5 requires a package that they haven't finished porting. It's the same package that is required for a web browser. So I think that it will get ported. And real simple, you install Qt4 developer. And when I do it in AMPM, this is what I get. That's the only thing I requested. You see that lovely list of dependencies. So if you were going to try to install it yourself, you'd have to figure out you needed all of those and go out and find them and install them. But of course, there are two more which are down if I scroll down. And then on top of that, I already have Qt4 installed. So the 5 packages for Qt4 are missing. And then its dependencies, which is the core of cups, which is clib, which is font configure, and probably 24 others, and their development packages, which I happen to already have installed because of other development that I'm doing. So I think I figured there were somewhat over 50 total packages you would have to install to get to the point that I am at to be able to do this. So no matter how much you hate RPM Yum, you're probably just going to have to bite the bullet and use it. The only things that once I installed using the RPM, the only 2 things I had set were these. And the reason I had set them, well, if I had iLink, I could have just used iLink. In fact, I know it works because I tried it. But since iLink is part of a proprietary IBM package, not everyone is going to have iLink. You probably download it somewhere. Okay. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you an Impress feature that is quite nice. Okay. I have Impress only on this desktop, the one I'm pointing to. You like that? Switches to all of them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a real quick program. I'm going to write hello world in Qt Creator. So the first thing I'm going to do is it's going to be a Qt widget project, so I'm going to choose that. And then I have to come up with a title for it, and it has to be different. It's hello too, because I've already done hello. And then I want to decide where I want to put it. And I'm going to put it in this year's warp stock, you can see these are ones that where I've already created it. And then the details, it just tells you the path that it's using for various things. And then obviously I can change any of these if I wished. These are just the defaults and there's no advantage to changing them. And then if I wanted to set it up for version control, I could set it up, for example, in Git, and it would do all of this automatically for me. And so here's where it takes me. It takes me into basically the main C++, and it's written a little bit of code. All of this code relates to just the interface. So I'm going to go in here. This is, for those of you who are more familiar with OS2 programming, this is really what would be the resource file, the RC file. And so here's the default it gives me, but I don't need a status bar. I don't I don't need a main toolbar, and I don't need a menu bar. So I go ahead and remove those. Now I gotta go down and pick out what I do want. Okay, for this I'm going to need a couple of text labels. So I'll come up here and drop a text label in there. Then put in my second text label. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go in and rename these objects so that when I look at the actual code, it tells me what they are. In other words, label 2 doesn't tell me much. So I'm going to call the top one label hello, because that's the one that's going to say hello world. And, oops. And this one will be label count, because what I'm going to do is put in a counter that tells you how many times you called hello world. So now I can choose both of these boxes, and I can link them together vertically. And in this case, I'm just going to enlarge the text box to kind of show you what my options basically are. Now I can go back and choose both of them again. And I can come down here and come down, find alignment, pick this, and I can switch it to center alignment so that I've got these aligned in the center. I can go back and choose this one. Oops. Should have done that. And here I've got 2 text boxes with 3 dots in them. Okay. Now I need something to make this work. So I'm going to scroll up here. I'm going to grab a push button. Stick a push button there. And the first thing I'm going to do is change the label name. And go to slot is something I'm going to do eventually. If you're going to change the object name, you have to do it first, because otherwise you end up with the wrong name for the push button in the code. So change object name. Go ahead and do that. Now I can go to slot, and I have a bunch of different choices, but I'm going to pick click. So what that tells it is write a little code, which you can see here. It's created a program or a function for me that is what happens when it's clicked on. So what I'm going to do now, I cheated a little bit. Out on my clipboard is the actual code. You can see what it's doing is I have a static integer, which is count, which is going to start at 0, and then I have a string count. And so first of all, I'm telling it, put this text in label hello box. And then down here, it's going to increment the count and basically put the text that it's created here. In other words, what it's doing is it's taking an integer and turning it into a string, and then it's going to put that in the other box, the label count. And it's static so that it keeps incrementing, so that every time I push the button, that number will get bigger. Okay, so now I can go back, and we can do a little bit of cleanup on this. That box doesn't look too good, so let's shrink it down a little bit in size. And then I will come down here and give it a title bar that makes a little more sense than main window. And then I'm going to go ahead, come up here, and I'm going to save it. I now go down here. This hammer is my tool to build it with, and hit build. Now it has to think a little bit.
Greg, did you have to configure something to call the linker?
The only thing I had to do was to configure it was those two environmental variables that I sent for WLink. Everything else was configured because when it installed, since I'm in the RPM Yum environment, it's able to find GCC and everything else. And so now, what I can do is I can go here. And there's my program. So it's that simple. Obviously, it'd be nice to design something that does something more exciting than that, but
it compiled and created the exe file, right?
Yeah.
Hello2.exe. Okay.
Yeah. It's if I go out. Let's see. If I went out to where those hello files are, it's in the one that's labeled desktop hello2, et cetera, is where the exe file is.
Okay.
So you're going to port PML to QT?
Of course. If you'd ever seen PML's code, you'd know why no one would think about that.
I've seen it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just talk briefly about setting up an open Wacom environment, because that's the other GCC and Open Wacom are probably the only two realistic choices we have for mainstream C or C++ compilers, because they're the only two that you're going to get any support for whatsoever. The original version, the one that was open sourced years ago, its last release was 1.9, and I think that was 8 or 9 years ago. Several of them have been forked with a 2.0 release. Part of the problems with the forks is that it's not really very clear if anybody who cares at all about OS2 has anything to do with them. And as such, they're not concerned whether they break the OS2 version or not. I've never tried any of them, so I don't know that they're broken, but probably something to avoid rather than find out how they're broken. There have been quite a few updates and fixes in 2.0 to the OS2 code, but again, it's never been released. There is a beta available, which I built, which is on NetLabs. There are also at least one person who has a nightly build that is available, and
Frank?
Yeah, I think it's Frank. And I don't know where that one really is, except that I know that it exists.
Which one do you use, the 2.0?
Yeah, I use one that's even got more in it than the beta that's out there, because I haven't put out another beta.
Yeah, I don't actually think Frank has done any code changes recently. I think he's just got the build server going and he runs it.
Right, it's what's been checked in. But basically, all the OS2 code has been checked into the P4 repository,
Right,
or most of it.
He's doing it off the Perforce repository rather than, you think the other fork that we're talking about is a guy named Jerry Malik.
Yeah.
And he's got it, his fork lives on GitHub.
Yeah, and there's actually a fork on SourceForge also.
Hmm?
There's one on SourceForge also.
I think that's
SourceForge.
because I don't think we can update SourceForge anymore. They're sort of broken.
Yeah.
I'd have to go look to be sure.
So, just a few notes on setting up the environment. The top line, the set Watcom, is basically something you have to do to get this to run. The reason I have the shell and the COM spec in there is because I prefer, as my programming environment, to use 4OS2. But because there are certain things that don't work in it, some Rex programs and stuff that don't work in it, I use in my base install, it's set to CMD. And the bottom thing is just to make 4OS2 work more like command commands. Okay, then the toolkit, obviously toolkit main, you need to put all these things in, and obviously all of this stuff is specific to my setup. But these are the various things that you end up setting so that basically your environment can find stuff. Same thing with this. You know, some of the temp paths, some of the paths to some of the message files that are in the toolkit. And then these just set up the help files. These, in other words, PM reference is actually 5 different files. This just hooks them together so that you can pull up PM reference. And then the Watcom environment itself is, you have to, again, it's an issue of setting a bunch of paths. Now, obviously, you could set all of this stuff in your config.sys if you really wanted to, but it has a real tendency to clutter up config.sys, and you do have limitations on line links and things like that. Again, just some more things. And then as we come farther down, the SVN editor, SVN tester, SVN kill, all of that is actually specific to my FM2 build. And, you know, but there are various things that you can set like that. the WIPFC, to use WPIFC, the IPF compiler, you have to set that path, because otherwise it can't find its base files. You would also have to set IPFC to wherever it was for the same reason. It's where it finds its different language files and stuff like that. And then in this case, I have Perl set. And sort of just a quick summary of a setup for Open Watcom. So, thank you.
Great. About about using Qt Creator. And if you want to do something, maybe something wild like making the application, the Qt application, to merge with Workplace Shell or to become a Workplace Shell object, is it possible or is it missing something?
To create a Workplace Shell object is, you can basically, any executable, you can create an object for it. So, no, there's nothing special about it.
Okay.
Now, if you wanted a Workplace Shell class, that's different.
Okay, okay.
You can, I don't know, I think of them as pseudo classes because you can make a class that is an executable. It calls an executable, but it's not a class probably in the classic sense. I don't know. Well, yeah.
Okay.
But as far as an object, yeah, basically any file you can create an object on OS2. And if you create an executable object with a Qt executable, it works just the same as, well, in fact, well, here. Oops, I'm not on, but I have an object of my Hello program on my desktop. So, other questions?
The Watcom, that was an aside? That had nothing to do with the Qt?
No, it has nothing to do with the Qt. And I suppose you could probably hack Qt to have it build with Open Watcom, but it's not fundamentally the way it's designed.
And does Qt provides a lot of other facilities besides just the GUI stuff, right? There's class libraries that come with it.
Like I said, you can think of it comprehensively as it's the UI, the user interface is what it provides. You know, including all the boxes and everything like that, but it has sound features and other things like that also.
And what is version 5 going to provide the one that you're
it's the web engine is really what matters to us, which is the part that hasn't been ported yet, but that's really, well, the core of Chrome even is that web engine.
I see.
Yeah, that's part. The other part is no one's writing applications to Qt4 anymore, so we can't just go build an application and compile it without Qt5.
Yeah, and there's enough difference between Qt4 and Qt5. I tried compiling this with Qt5, and it throws a huge bunch of errors.
You mean that little hello program?
Yeah, that little hello program. Some of the font stuff has been moved from the class that was in Qt4 to some other class in Qt5. I never tried to figure it out because it just wasn't worth it to me to get it to work. But that's what I found out, is that little program won't even compile through Qt5.
Yeah, when you got an application like Qt Creator, it is infinitely matched to the libraries that it understands. Because it's generating code calls to it.
Right.